One of the fundamental shifts we're noticing with advertising is that it's beginning to get costlier and the returns on margins is becoming smaller. Why does this happen? Well, there's three key reasons, but first is that the advertising platforms themselves are beginning to get costlier. And this happens because there's more advertisers than ever. More people are relying on advertising. And I think like last week, I was reached out with an article saying that the dependency for practice owners are going to increase by 25% on advertising agencies like mine. So the landscape are more players relying on advertising, and therefore the advertising platforms are comfortable charging you a higher margin. So let's say if you were seeking to earn $1,000 as profit, just as an example, they'd be happy to charge you $990 or $995 because if you weren't going to pay it, the next person would gladly pay that. So rising advertising costs. The second is a reduction in the people in the advertising platform, the customers, the consumers who are willing to listen. So the number of people who engage in advertising back then used to be much more plentiful, and this is how they would learn about new products or services. But nowadays, we're really not making we're making incremental shifts in function, incremental shifts in innovation. So people don't rely on advertising as much to learn about what's new. And what's actually happening is people are shunning advertising entirely. They don't like being controlled by an algorithm. They don't like being shouted at. So what we see is 52% of Americans now have some sort of ad blocking software, and people are leaving a lot of the digital space in favor of a more analog lifestyle. And we see more of this in social media. We see a lot of this even in YouTube, where it's inundated with AI shorts. It's just not becoming a environment where people are receptive to what previously worked through advertising. And finally, it's going to be the regulations of advertising themselves. Excuse me. When we run ads, your goal is to find one that resonates with people and gets them to take action. And once you find an ad like that, eventually you're left with an ecosystem where all the people who resonated with that ad eventually have resonated with it, and you're left with people who don't resonate with that ad. So your next objective is going to be to go and find another ad that works. And the only way you can do that is by tracking results, seeing how people behave, and also iterating on them using algorithms and so on. But those two things, tracking and algorithms, especially in healthcare, are being throttled. So we find that it's becoming more costly to find advertising that works. So now we're left with this environment where we have worsening advertisements to an audience that is less likely to listen, and the costs of advertising are rising. So it's becoming more and more urgent that we figure a way out, an exit strategy from advertising. And the way I propose is that in the past, advertising worked when you had something to sell and you wanted to ramp up the number of people who were buying it. That was advertising. But now we're realizing that people don't rely on advertising, and they can easily find a perfect provider for them using many things like Google search and so on. And so it's not going to be advertising that gives us a competitive advantage. That it still works, but it's becoming worse and worse. So what I propose is that we reduce reliance on advertising, create a product or service in a way that is necessary, that becomes a need, that serves a group of people better, rather than having the same dental practice, the same level of service, pushing for the same functions, the same features, the same customer service as everyone else, and trying to advertise that isn't going to be a competitive advantage strategy. What is going to give you a competitive advantage is designing your practice in a way that is specific for a specific group of people. And this might sound risky because why should we go smaller? But what we find is that by serving a smaller group, a group who has shared beliefs, a group who believes dentistry should be a certain way, then you're able to become a necessity for them. And the flaw is thinking that by targeting small, you'll end up with nothing at all. Because one of my exercises that I have my clients do is we take a 5-mile radius look around their office, and we look for people with those very niche beliefs. And what we find is that we end up targeting about 1% of the population, which sounds immensely small. So we just did an exercise, 5 miles around his radius. We're about 650,000 people. And we figured that we were targeting about 40% or 40,000 people. So that was about 1.5% or so. And 40,000 people seems tiny, but when you realize that you can design your practice in service of those 40,000 people, so much so that they would love that experience and also tell the other 40,000 people about it, you realize that you really have a recipe for success, because you don't need 40,000 people to thrive. Like, you can do very well with 1,000 or even 2,000. That would be huge. So we're finding that differentiation, choosing a small group, standing for something in a way that's meaningful for them, and designing your practice in service of them is a very valid strategy for leaving advertising. So hope you understand my ramble. It went on for quite a bit, but yeah, try to, I hope that's food for thought. Thanks.